Hey, welcome back. You know what? A few years ago, before the pandemic stopped all of our traveling, we used to have Rebel News cruises, which were really fun. And we actually had a Rebel News trip to Israel. About 45 of our most enthusiastic fans came with us on a bona fide journalistic mission. We went across the whole country. We met Palestinian leaders, Jewish leaders, political leaders, historians. It was great. Well, the pandemic stopped all that, but we're doing it again. In fact, we're going to Israel this September 5th. There are still, I think, a couple of tickets left if you want to come. Check out all the details at rebelvacations.com. But this time we're adding something different. We are adding on a second leg of the journey to go to Dubai, the Arabic city in the United Arab Emirates. It's actually a kind of Abraham Accords fact finding trip. We'll spend a week in Israel and then 3 or 4 days in Dubai to see if it indeed is a warm peace. I'll be there, Sheila Gunn Reid, David Menzies, Avi Yamini, Drea Humphreys. It's going to be a great team of rebels, and hopefully you. For more details, go to rebelvacations.com. We are interested in Israel, just whether or not the tour was happening, because such incredible things are going on in that country, and we'll see them firsthand. It looks to me like a political division in the country that is more shocking than anything I've seen, even in the United States. The United States, where Democrats and Republicans despise each other, where there's talk about a national divorce or even a civil war. I think it's just talk in America, but it feels like it actually is on the precipice of a genuine civil war in Israel. I know that sounds crazy, but to help us figure out what's really going on, we go to our friend Joel Pollack, the senior editor at large at Breitbart.com, who's been covering this story for them. Joel, great to see you again. What I see in Israel right now suggests a kind of division that makes the Trump-Hillary division look like a friendship.
Well, I don't know how real that is, and it's exciting to hear that you're going to Israel in a few weeks because you will have a sense on the ground of how things feel. I've had the experience before, especially during the height or the depths of the second Palestinian Intifada, of feeling as though Israel was under siege and perhaps even about to give up. And when I arrived there, I found a healthy, thriving, robust society that was dealing with a problem of terrorism at the periphery, but was overall intact and simply too big and too strong for anybody to bring down. And I think you'll find that as well. I have a friend named Asher Fredman, who is a veteran of the Israeli army. He's an Israeli. He studied in the States and went back there. And he tweeted late last week that despite all of the media talk about Israelis being at each other's throats, that life actually felt as if it had continued normally. There were large-scale demonstrations. There was some disruption to traffic and things like that. There certainly is a lot of passion on either side of the issue of judicial reform. But for the most part, Israeli society remains intact. And the term civil war is mostly being used by people on the left who seem desperate that the majority of the Knesset, Israel's parliament, is determined to fulfill its promises to its voters and to pass these judicial reforms, which are actually rather modest. There's a panic on the left that is partly about the loss of political power, partly about intolerance toward any election or any governing majority that isn't them or that they didn't win. And I think it's also fueled by social media. I think there's a level of unreality to it. I'm not trying to dismiss the idea that there really are divisions that are important, but when I talk to people on the left in Israel, including some of my own relatives, or I listen to what people on the left are saying, serious people, intellectual people, they almost never address the issue of judicial reform. They are not really upset about the particular reforms being pushed. They are really expressing a kind of anxiety about their own place in Israel's future at a time when demographically the balance is shifting in favor of more religious Jews and in favor of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa, what are called in Israel Mizrahi Jews, who tend to be browner, who tend to be a little bit less educated sometimes. They come from more impoverished backgrounds, but they're still very much part of the fabric of Israeli life. The old secular Ashkenazi Eastern European elite, which was predominantly socialist and which was responsible in large part for the founding of the State of Israel, is feeling its power slip away because it is largely confined to the urban coastal environment. It is very heavily represented in the media and in the tech sector and at the universities, but it doesn't represent the population as a whole. And ever since the end of the peace process in the early 2000s, it has lost its, if you will, grip on Israeli political discourse. It had already lost the majority in the late 70s to the Likud party led by Menachem Begin, who was the first to bring the opposition to power in Israel. But the left stopped being able to set the agenda, except through the courts, where the powerful Israeli judiciary took more and more powers for itself over time, declaring a constitutional revolution and the right to review legislation, which is part of many other democracies, but was never explicitly guaranteed by any constitution in Israel and not by any legislation. So the left hung on through the judiciary, and eventually conservative voters got tired of it, and they're trying to pare back the judiciary, not to make it dependent or to take away its judicial independence, but to keep the branches in balance so that when people vote for a government and it carries out a policy, it actually can do that without being overturned almost automatically by the courts.
You know, I'm so glad you said everything you said there, because I have not been in Israel in a while, and I do listen to social media from Anglo-oriented Ashkenazi Jews as opposed to the Sephardi Jews or Russian Jews or working class Jews. And I'm sure what you said is right. It feels a little bit like a color revolution, almost like, what would America be like if Trump won in 2024? You would have people looking for any excuse to jam a clog in the works. In this case, they actually are focused on their remaining source of power, which is the Supreme Court. Joel, can you tell our viewers, I think I know some of them, but I know you follow this closely, what are some of the quirks about the Israeli Supreme Court that the left and that the court itself is fighting over, and that Netanyahu ran to campaign on? Because some of them are so astonishing that I think Canadians or Americans who are used to sort of a check and balance, the courts, the legislature, the executive, all in sort of tension with each other, I think they would be blown away by how powerful and self-delegated that power is by the Israeli Supreme Court. It would shock people in Canada and the United States. Can you list a couple of ways that the Israeli Supreme Court is different, ways that Netanyahu wants to change?
Sure. I mean, one of the ones that comes to mind immediately, and this makes a lot of Americans take a second look at what's going on in Israel, because the Israeli Supreme Court is composed of 15 members. We have 9 justices here in the United States, and every time there's a case at the Supreme Court, it has to be heard by all 9 of the justices. But in Israel, not all 15 justices hear every case, and in fact, the Chief Justice in Israel can delegate certain cases to certain justices. So the Chief Justice can decide that a particular case is going to be heard by a conservative justice or a liberal justice, and thereby determine the outcome of the case. It's not as if the balance on the court is allowed to work its own way through the facts and the laws, but rather the Chief Justice can essentially decide whether liberals or conservatives prevail on a particular issue simply by deciding which judges or justices are going to hear the case. It's as if the only judge allowed to hear the affirmative action case would be Clarence Thomas, who's opposed to affirmative action. The left would never accept that.